Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. What is sustainable animal agriculture? What about regenerative animal agriculture? What's the importance for animal agriculture of these practices? Joining us today to discuss just that is Steve Lerner, Senior Scientific and Business Advisor for Novonesis. Welcome, Steve. Great to have you back with us.
Hi, Sarah. Very happy to be here.
For those of you that are joining us here online, we thank you for taking the time. If you have any questions, post those there in the chat on the side of your screen. If you're joining us from social media, post your questions directly in those channels, and we'll get those over to Steve. Now, Steve, I know this is really an area that you're passionate about and like to talk about. And that being so, why, in your opinion, is it important for beef and dairy producers to consider sustainable and regenerative agriculture practices in today's market?
Well, if you think about the definition for these two things, let's focus on sustainable animal agriculture. It really is the production of meat, milk, or eggs for beef and dairy, of course, meat and milk, and doing so in a way that is sustainable for the environment, for the economics of the populace, and for social stewardship. We do these things to meet demand while paying attention to the bigger picture around agriculture. The best thing about sustainable animal ag is that producers have been doing it for generations. They have been adopting practices to improve efficiency. And the more efficiency you have in the production of these foods from feed, then that is sustainable. On the other hand, we want to ensure that our base, the soil on which we grow the nutrients for our animals, is also managed in a sustainable way. And this is where regenerative agriculture comes in, where you pay attention to land management to improve biodiversity, soil quality, and the general ecosystem. And these two things work hand in hand, producing nutrients in crops, feeding those nutrients to animals to more efficiently produce food for demand for people.
So then walk us through like the core principles of sustainable agriculture and how that differs then from regenerative agriculture.
So, sustainable animal agriculture focuses on reducing undesirable outputs and improving efficiency. We want to reduce nitrogenous waste that goes on the ground. We want to reduce methane that goes in and contributes to global warming. We want to improve the efficiency of production. That is the sole goal of sustainable animal agriculture, about efficiency. If you think about animals taking in nutrients from their feed and then converting those nutrients to meat and milk while using some for maintenance and some for defense, the more efficiently they take in carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen and convert those things to beef or pork or poultry meat, then the intensity of carbon use goes down because you get more output per unit input. It's a very sustainable notion. And modern agriculturalists have been driving towards this type of sustainability forever, employing good nutritional practices, clean air, clean water, good management practices to improve efficiency, which I translate directly to sustainability. On the other side of that equation, they're going to use the land to produce crops for feeding to their animals, either in the form of pellet materials from the corn produced in grains or directly feeding silage to beef and dairy cattle. If they are able to grow crops and use cover crops to improve soil quality, if they have natural manure management and can use that in the soil to improve the biodiversity, to restore biodiversity, to look at the way that cover crops can disperse rainwater, to allow the soil with roots in it to absorb and become a carbon sink. So you can look at the use of land and that ecosystem in terms of carbon inputs and outputs. And the more efficiently you can manage that soil for the production of feed for animals, then it simply goes hand in hand to desire to sustainably produce food.
So then let's talk about economics, right? So for producers who are adopting these practices, how do they balance like those upfront costs? What does this look like from, say, an economic standpoint?
Well, the beauty of these philosophies is if you employ them correctly, you're able to get better growth of crops from your land. You're able to use manure and natural amendments rather than investing in other additives for your soil. If you harvest those crops and use a effective inoculant, you can preserve those nutrients in silage until you feed them to animals. If you adopt practices like adding probiotics or prebiotics, other philosophies that ensure efficiency, then all of your investments lead to better returns because you are producing more output in terms of pounds of meat, gallons of milk, uh, uh, dozens of eggs out of your operation with the same or lower inputs. So when you look at these ROIs, we routinely look at models that by any imagination are at least a 3-to-1 return, if not 4, 5, 6, or 7 times return, all depending upon how you do the calculus. The bottom line is if you reduce the input, you can say we save this many tons of feed producing this many tons of beef, for example. You can directly correlate the carbon footprint of that unused, unconsumed feed and say this is the reduction in carbon used to produce this much meat. I heard a great expression, the devil is always in the denominator. So if you can reduce that denominator in terms of feed used, then your intensity of carbon use goes down. And if you're producing pounds of meat, milk, or eggs and selling those to your value chain downstream, then your business partners are buying those materials that have a lower carbon footprint, which again is moving towards this reduction in carbon use is a very sustainable idea.
Which is what a lot of the consumer good products companies are looking for. They're looking for those kinds of initiatives, and it sounds like from a producer standpoint, those economic benefits can be significant. So then talk to us about some actionable strategies, maybe what rotational grazing, methane reduction, those kinds of things that producers can adopt to improve both sustainability and profitability. What's on your radar when it comes
Well,
to that?
you can start from cow calf to stockers and feedlots. We could talk about pig flows. You're now going into truly one of my favorite subjects. But let's take rotational grazing and use of a pasture. When you use rotational grazing, you're trying to mimic the natural migration patterns of these bovine. They want to graze. You get better utilization of your materials. They are leaving fertilizer everywhere they go. Their action on the ground stimulates regrowth of crops. It is a very sustainable idea. If you look at the cover cropping and the value of having crops over land, I grew up as a kid in an era where tilling was the rule. I was lucky to attend the Sustainable Ag Summit. One of the producers on a panel said he's in Western Tennessee and inherited the farm from his father, who inherited from his father, and this third generation farm. He said, I don't know how many tons of topsoil we sent down to the Mississippi Delta in rain because tilling was absolutely the wrong way to do it. And now they use cover cropping. You can just see the way the rainwater is dispelled. The root system promotes draw of water into the ground. That acts as a beautiful carbon sink. You have better growth of plants. It is simply a beautiful practice that producers would naturally go to because it is better for them. They get better output from their fields. They lose less topsoil. They need to use less synthetic amendments. And it simply is a regenerative system that improves efficiency at every point.
Sounds like we both did some tilling back in the day, in the fall or in the spring, field cultivating, plowing, some of that kind of disking, all that good stuff. So let's talk about consumer preferences and market trends. And are those influencing, say, the adoption of sustainable and regen practices? Are we at that level? I know we kind of mentioned a little bit, but are we there now where it's really kind of doing that pull through, and producers and ranchers need to say, hey, I need to get on board with some of this?
I think that is exactly the reason. It is the consumer putting pressure on the resellers of food that say we want to be responsible adults and be good stewards of our environment, and our choices are going to be affected by what you, the reseller, can tell me about the carbon footprint and the impact in our environment of the food that I'm buying. Because of that, we now all talk about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 objectives for reducing carbon. These consumer good companies are putting pressure on their supply chains to do the responsible thing and to reduce the carbon handprint that they're sending in the form of a scope 3 input. Now, what's really very interesting, and again, an amusing anecdote, at the Sustainable Animal Ag Summit, there was a producer on stage who has been a rancher in California for decades and an inherited farm. And he said, and I'll quote as close as I can, he said, boy, when I used to say the word sustainability, I used to have to spit to get the bad taste out of my mouth. And now, he says, I appreciate that everything they're wanting us to do is simply the best practices in our operation. We have been in farming for 7 generations. What is more sustainable than that? And it's just the jargon that makes it scary. And we associate sustainability perhaps sometimes too close to green energy, which is a whole nother topic for discussion at a different time. But in truth, sustainable ag is what modern producers have been moving to for generations. It is simply better business to behave in a sustainable manner, period. So when they have the opportunity to learn about cover crops and about good soil management, they take that opportunity. It's good business. When they can look at probiotics, for example, and feed probiotics to improve the efficiency of growth rates in their animals, they avail themselves of that opportunity because it improves the sustainability, improves their profitability. Now, there will come a time when there will be a value stream generated by best practices in sustainability, whether they're insets or offsets. Let's talk about insets. At some point, it will become a reality that major resellers of food will provide a value back down the chain in the form of cash payments for reduced carbon footprints. We will need life cycle analyses differently than we have them now. There will need to be a concerted effort to harmonize these type of analyses so that the playing field is level, but the profit will go to the early adopters and those organizations in terms of the producers of meat, milk, and eggs that can demonstrate the value they're bringing to their value chain in the form of reduced carbon footprint. Then this will be something they can earn revenue from. Now, I've been focusing on carbon. I really should not leave out, water and other natural resources and waste management. These two feature in. And when you think about the use of digesters on farms to regenerate energy, in some situations, those are economically practical, not in all, but these are the type of strategies that modern producers are examining particularly in their different locations, whether these ways of regenerating value from a waste product make sense. And again, contributes to sustainability, reduces the carbon footprint of their operation, and then maybe gives them some leverage in garnering inset value from their down chain in the supply organization.
Do you think the consumer goods companies who are putting in place some of these policies or objectives, do they understand where animal agriculture is at this point, or and what we're doing from a sustainability standpoint already? Is that a understanding that kind of back and forth, or do you think there's a lot of education still to do?
I think their understanding is greatly improved in the last 2 decades, for sure. I think everyone's understanding of what sustainability really means has improved. That said, our education path is far from complete. I mentioned life cycle analyses, LCAs. I believe we are on the forefront of this kind of effort. We at Novonesis work with organizations like iFeeder, the Institute for Feed Education and Research, who are working to try to improve our understanding and use of things like LCAs and LCIs. I believe consumer goods companies understand the value in terms of scope 3 reduction that can be garnered from those suppliers who adopt best sustainable practices. Obviously, they're aware of that. There are some that are offering insets today. I think once we have a reasonable scientific method for harmonizing the way we calculate the value we're bringing in terms of carbon reduction, water use, land management, et cetera, then these payment of insets will become an absolute reality. And if you want to compete in the sale of beef or poultry or eggs or milk, then the biggest value will go to the early adopters of best practices.
So we do have a question that's come in from the audience. I want to encourage the audience to post any questions. What objective metrics are currently accepted as valid measurements of sustainability? What can we improve on how we track these things?
The simplest metrics are still going to be the typical variables of our industry, whether it is the efficiency of energy-corrected milk production, pounds of energy-corrected milk per pounds of input, its average daily gain, its growth rate, its feed efficiency. The measures that we typically take in our industry are still valid measures of sustainability. What we need to do is translate that increased modicum of gain to reduced feed used, and then calculate the carbon footprint of that feed in a reliable, repeatable, discernibly measurable way, so that it's not simply our choice on how we calculate it. Once it becomes the official way of doing that, then everyone who is feeding animals will have the same chance to say, I feed a corn soy-based diet, I've saved this many tons of feed over the year, that translates to this in terms of carbon footprint. So it's not a change in what we're measuring. It simply needs to mature a bit in how we translate those efficiency measures, rate of gain, feed efficiency, morbidity, mortality across industries, into the reduced carbon impact that it represents.
And I just want to make a note, we did have Laura Moody on with iFeeder here a couple weeks ago. You can go back and watch that segment if you folks are interested. Some new tools in the sustainability tool chest that they're offering, which are pretty impressive. And it sounds like you did some work on those, Steve, or had some input on those committees.
A little bit.
So what would you say the future looks like then for beef and dairy producers who integrate sustainable regenerative agriculture, both in terms of, say, challenges and opportunities?
Well, I love the fact that when I look at my 43-year history in animal agriculture, there has certainly been tremendous consolidation in the dairy space, in the beef space. And I know firsthand from what I've witnessed that the professionalism in the management of the production of our food has improved in the last 4 decades. We now look at the average size of dairy herds being 500 to 600 rather than 150 cows per herd. You look at beef operations and the number of animals under the care of professional managers has gone up significantly. And I believe that this professionalism in management is what leads to the adoption of best practices. Those who are successful in this type of business in American agriculture are making very good business decisions. They've been doing that for some time. They are typically early adopters of best practices, and they consider things like the use of probiotics and the use of silage inoculants and the use of best practices in rotational grazing and land management. So I think this is simply a reflection of better management over time, and that will continue into the future.
We have another question from the audience. Do we need individual farm or animal traceability to accomplish sustainability goals?
Oh, I individual farm traceability maybe. I guess it all depends on how rigorous we need to be in our life cycle analyses. We talk about the use of secondary data. This is the value we had assigned to this corn crop, for example, and we can use a national average. I think it will be quite a tedious adventure if we had to calculate an LCA for every field of corn that we harvest in order to do that type of calculation. I think a standard that has a likelihood of being successfully adopted would need to look at it at a higher level. As long as everyone was using the same type of standards, then that might be close enough. Again, time will tell, but I just don't think our capacity or our desire to go overly detailed in our metrics is ever going to be met with success. I think there will have to be some reasonability factor put into this mechanism if in fact it's going to drive better practices through the payment of insets and the value chain generated by good behaviors.
Key factors, key takeaways. What do you want to leave our audience with here today, Steve?
Well, everyone should embrace the idea of sustainable animal and regenerative ag. It is here to stay. I'm very fond of saying, if you don't get on the sustainability train, it's going to run you over. It's here to stay. And no one should have any anxiety about what sustainability means or what it's bringing. It's bringing profitability by adopting best practices. It's bringing security to our food production system by ensuring the sustainability of the ecosystem on which we grow our crops. It is something that everyone should embrace positively and look forward to when viable mechanisms and tools are brought forward to truly quantify the good that we're doing beyond efficiency of gain, conversion, etc.
The best place to go to get information. Say I'm a farmer or rancher and I'm like, okay, I'm on board, but I need information. Where's like some good resources to go to?
If we're looking for options for biosolutions, of course, come to novonesis.com. But I would certainly point anyone to iFeeder as a fantastic resource on sustainability. They have published a sustainability toolkit that would allow any organization in the feed system to approach the idea of sustainability, the what's in it for them, and a step-by-step process. There's more information on LCAs and what they mean and who's adopting them and why they're adopting them. And Laura Moody and iFeeders and the AFIA, the American Feed Industry Association, are excellent resources for these concepts, and they'd be abundantly happy to share everything they have in hand to provide insights and education.
Very good. Our thanks to you, Dr. Steve Lerner of Novonesis. Thank you for your time and insight today. It's been a great discussion.
My absolute pleasure, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, we appreciate all of you tuning in today. Until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.